Year 1162, on the stark and unforgiving plains of northern Mongolia, near the banks of the Onon River, a child was born. He would enter a world of brutal tribal warfare, where a man's life was often short, and alliances were as fleeting as the steppe winds. This was the world that awaited the boy named Temujin. Legend claims he was born clutching a clot of blood in his right fist, a powerful omen of a destiny drenched in conquest. His father, a minor chieftain named Yassa, saw this not with fear, but with a sense of profound significance. He believed his son was destined to become a great warrior, a uniter of his people. The Mongolian steppe was a harsh cradle. It was a vast sea of grass under an endless sky, but it was also a land of extreme temperatures, scarce resources, and constant danger. To survive here meant understanding the land intimately, reading the weather, and knowing that every day was a fight against nature itself. From the moment he could walk, Temujin's education began. Before a boy could wield a sword, he had to master the horse. These sturdy, resilient steppe ponies were extensions of the Mongol warrior, essential for herding, hunting, and the lightning-fast warfare that would come to define them. Alongside horsemanship came the art of the bow. The Mongol composite bow was a marvel of engineering, powerful and accurate. Young Temujin would have spent countless hours practicing, learning to shoot from the saddle, to hit a moving target, skills that were not sport, but vital for survival and future conflict. His mother, Holan, a woman of noble birth who had been abducted by his father, was his first teacher in the art of resilience. She instilled in her children the core values of endurance, loyalty, and the unshakable importance of family unity in a world determined to tear them apart. Life revolved around the nomadic encampment. The family's wealth and survival depended on their herds of sheep, goats, and horses. Protecting these animals from predators, both animal and human, was a constant, round-the-clock responsibility that fell to every member of the family, young and old. The political landscape was a chaotic patchwork of rival clans and tribes: the Tartars, the Merkits, the Temujin. Raids were a constant threat, launched to steal horses, abduct women, and settle old blood feuds. For a minor clan like Temujin's, vulnerability was a permanent state of being. Within the jur, the hearth was the sacred center of the family. It was a source of warmth, light, and food, a symbol of life and continuity. It was around this fire that stories were told, traditions were passed down, and the bonds that would be tested to their limits were first forged. Young Temujin was a keen observer of power. He watched his father, Yassa, lead their small band of followers. He saw how respect was earned not just through strength in battle, but through generosity, strategic thinking, and the ability to command the loyalty of other fierce, independent men. The Onon River, a ribbon of life flowing through the steppe, was more than just the site of his birth. It was a source of water, a place for fishing, and a constant landmark in his nomadic childhood. Its steady, powerful flow mirrored the relentless current of destiny that was beginning to pull him forward. When Yassa, Temujin's father, traveled to a neighboring tribe to arrange a betrothal for his 9-year-old son, he could not have known the journey would be his last. He sealed an alliance by promising Temujin to a young girl named Bert, leaving his son with her family to learn their customs, a common practice of the time. On his return journey, Yassa encountered a camp of Tartars, his lifelong enemies. Following the steppe tradition of hospitality, they offered him food and drink, but the hospitality was a mask for poison. He rode for days, desperately trying to reach his own camp, but the traitor's treachery had sealed his fate. The death of a leader was a moment of supreme vulnerability. The Temujin, the tribe to which Yassa's clan was subject, saw not a family to be protected, but a burden to be discarded. In a brutal act of political calculation, they abandoned Holan and her 7 young children, leaving them utterly alone on the steppe. Their world shrank to a daily struggle for mere existence. Stripped of their tribe and their herd, they were forced into the life of scavengers. Holun led her children into the wilderness, teaching them to dig for wild roots, to catch fish with their bare hands, and to find sustenance where others saw only desolation. It was during these years that Holun's legendary fortitude was forged. She became a lioness protecting her cubs, shielding them from starvation, the elements, and the ever-present threat of human predators. Her unwavering determination not only kept them alive, but also modeled the very definition of resilience for her son. As Temujin grew, he and his brother Khasar became the family's primary hunters. They were not hunting for sport or glory, but for survival. Armed with small bows, they stalked marmots and other small game across the plains, their success or failure determining whether the family would eat that day. The pressures of starvation created fractures within the family. A bitter dispute arose between Temujin and his older half-brother, Begta, over a hunted fish. In a shocking act of cold pragmatism, Temujin and Khasar ambushed and killed Begta, establishing Temujin's authority and demonstrating his ruthless will to eliminate any challenge. His growing reputation did not go unnoticed. The Teyachiad, fearing the son of the man they had abandoned would one day seek revenge, hunted him down. They captured Temujin and subjected him to the ultimate humiliation. A wooden kang, a heavy yoke locked around his neck and wrists, marking him as a slave. But even in chains, Temujin's mind was working. During a chaotic feast, he saw his chance. He struck his guard with the heavy kang and fled into the night, plunging into the icy waters of the Onon River. He hid amongst the reeds, with only his nose above the water, as his pursuers searched the riverbanks with torches. He was discovered not by an enemy, but by a sympathetic commoner from the Sula clan, a man named Sorgan Shira. Recognizing the injustice of the boy's plight and perhaps seeing a spark of future greatness, he risked his own life to help. He hid Temujin in a cart full of wool, deceiving the Teyachiad patrols. After his escape, another blow fell. Thieves raided their small camp and stole the family's 8 remaining horses, their only source of wealth and mobility. For a nomad, this was a catastrophic loss, akin to being stripped naked and left to die. But for Temujin, it was not an end, but a call to action. Every loss, every betrayal, every hardship was a lesson hammered into the soul of the young man. The steppe was the anvil, and suffering was the hammer, forging his will into something unbreakable. He learned that relying on old tribal loyalties was a fatal mistake. True strength lay elsewhere. He began a relentless quest to retrieve his stolen horses, a mission that seemed impossible for one young man. He met a new companion, Orochu, who was so impressed by Temujin's determination that he abandoned his own family to help. This was the first test of his burgeoning charisma, the ability to inspire loyalty in others. Having endured years of hardship and now reaching manhood, Temujin's first strategic move was to claim the alliance his father had arranged. He traveled to the lands of the Ongjarat tribe to find Bert, the girl to whom he had been betrothed as a child, to formalize their union and secure her powerful family as allies. Upon his marriage to Bert, her family presented him with a magnificent dowry, a coat of the finest, most valuable black sable fur. Temujin, who owned almost nothing of material value, saw this not as a garment for himself, but as a priceless political tool, the key to unlocking a far greater power. He took the priceless coat and journeyed to the most powerful leader in the region, Togrul Khan of the Kerate tribe. Togrul had been an Anda, a sworn blood brother, to his father, Yesujay. Temujin presented the coat as a gift to reawaken this old bond, a brilliant act of diplomacy. Togrul Khan, moved by the memory of his friend and impressed by the young man's gesture, accepted the gift. He pledged to treat Temujin as his own son and promised his military support, stating, "In return for the black sable coat, I will gather your scattered people for you." It was Temujin's first major victory, without firing a single arrow. During this time, he also reconnected with a charismatic figure from his childhood, Jamaka. They had been inseparable friends as boys, even becoming Anders in a childhood ceremony. Their reunion was one of great joy, a meeting of two ambitious and talented young leaders on the rise. To solidify their bond as adults, Temujin and Jamaka renewed their vows as Anders. In a sacred ceremony, they exchanged gifts, a golden sash for Temujin, a white mare for Jamaka, and swore eternal brotherhood. Their combined charisma and strength made them a formidable force, attracting warriors from all across the plains. With the backing of the mighty Togrul Khan and the partnership of the popular Jamaka, Temujin's power grew exponentially. For the first time, the banners of three separate forces, the Kerates, Jamaka's followers, and Temujin's own small band, were raised together, creating a new, powerful confederation on the steppe. Inside a large jur, the three leaders would meet to plan their first campaigns. It was a council of war, a place of strategy and ambition. Here, Temujin absorbed lessons in large-scale command from the veteran Togrul and debated tactics with the clever Jamaka, honing his own instincts as a military commander. The alliance fostered a new sense of unity. Warriors who had once been rivals now trained together, feasted together, and prepared for battle as comrades. This broke down old clan-based suspicions and began to lay the groundwork for a new type of loyalty, one based not on bloodlines, but on shared purpose and allegiance to a leader. Holun, his mother, watched her son's rapid ascent with a mixture of immense pride and deep foreboding. She had guided him through weakness and poverty, and now she saw him navigating the treacherous currents of power. She understood better than anyone the precarious nature of alliances and the envy his success would inevitably provoke. Temujin's appeal was intensely personal. He possessed a rare ability to attract and retain fiercely loyal companions, known as nökers. These men were drawn not by his lineage, but by his character. His generosity, his courage, and his promise of a future based on merit rather than aristocratic birth. The concept of the nöker was revolutionary. It was a bond of servitude and loyalty directly to a chosen leader, superseding all family and clan ties. This was the foundation of his future state. He was building a new society where a man's worth was determined by his loyalty and ability, not by who his father was. Just as his fortune seemed secure, disaster struck. The Merkit tribe, enemies of his father who claimed his mother Holun, had originally been promised to one of them, launched a surprise dawn raid on his camp. In the chaos, his new wife Bert was abducted, a direct and humiliating challenge to his authority. Temujin managed to escape, but the loss of his wife plunged him into despair and fury. Looking at his plundered camp and the empty space where his wife's jur had stood, the shame was a physical blow. Rescuing her was not just a personal matter, it was a political necessity to restore his honor and prove his strength. Humbled and desperate, he immediately turned to his powerful allies. He rode to Togrul Khan and Jamaka, appealing to their oaths of alliance and brotherhood. He reminded them that an insult to him was an insult to them all, skillfully turning his personal crisis into a collective cause. His allies answered the call. Togrul Khan and Jamaka mobilized their formidable armies, and together, the three leaders commanded a force of 40,000 warriors. It was a massive wave of cavalry thundering across the steppe with a singular purpose: to crush the Merkids and rescue Bert. The attack on the Merkid stronghold was swift and merciless. The combined force overwhelmed the unsuspecting tribe, scattering their warriors and recovering the spoils of their raid. Temujin himself rode through the chaos, desperately searching for his wife, and found her amidst the confusion, a pivotal reunion that secured his lineage. The victory, however, sowed the seeds of a new conflict. During the campaign, the fundamental differences between Temujin and Jamaka became clear. Jamaka, an aristocrat at heart, favored the traditional power structures, while Temujin's egalitarian nature and his promotion of men based on merit threatened the old ways. Jamaka watched with growing jealousy and alarm as shepherds, blacksmiths, and other commoners, long excluded from power, abandoned him to join Temujin's camp. They were drawn to a leader who offered them respect and opportunity. To Jamaka, this was not leadership, it was a subversion of the natural order. The friction grew until one night, Jamaka issued a cryptic message, and with the dawn, he and his followers packed their camps and departed without a word. The brotherhood was broken. The steppe was now divided between two powerful, charismatic leaders who had once sworn eternal loyalty to each other. The inevitable conflict came when Jamaka, leveraging a minor incident involving a horse thief, declared war. He gathered a superior force and launched a surprise attack on Temujin's camp in the valley of Dalan Baljut. Temujin, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, was decisively defeated and forced to flee for his life. This defeat was a brutal but essential lesson. Temujin had been beaten not by a foreign enemy, but by his own Anda, his sworn brother. It taught him the ultimate unreliability of personal bonds in the face of political ambition, and solidified his conviction that a new, more rigid system of loyalty was needed to build a lasting nation. In a shocking act of cruelty designed to terrorize his rival's followers, Jamaka committed a strategic blunder. He captured 70 of Temujin's chieftains and had them boiled alive in a series of great cauldrons. This horrifying spectacle was meant to break the spirit of his enemies. Jamaka's brutality backfired spectacularly. Instead of inspiring terror, it inspired revulsion. Mongol warriors, even those who were neutral, were appalled by this violation of custom. Many who had previously supported Jamaka for his aristocratic lineage now saw him as a tyrant and flocked to Temujin, who became a symbol of just and honorable leadership. Temujin spent the next decade consolidating his power. He stopped fighting for mere survival and began a systematic campaign to unite all the Mongol-speaking tribes. His strategy was not simply to defeat his enemies in battle, but to absorb their people into his own, creating a larger, stronger, and more diverse coalition. One of his core strategies was the complete dismantlement of conquered tribal structures. After defeating a tribe, he would scatter its members throughout his own army and population. This prevented the vanquished people from regrouping and rebelling, forcing them to become part of the new Mongol identity he was building. In a radical departure from tradition, he promoted his generals based solely on skill and loyalty, rather than on noble birth or kinship. Men like Jib, a former enemy who had once shot Temujin's horse from under him, were recognized for their talent and elevated to high command, earning their fierce loyalty. He waged a long and bitter war against the Tartars, the tribe that had poisoned his father. When he finally conquered them, he exacted a terrible revenge, ordering the death of every Tartar male taller than a linchpin of a cart wheel, effectively destroying them as a political and military entity. His final showdown was with the combined forces of his old friend-turned-rival Jamaka and his one-time patron Togrul Khan, who had also betrayed him. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he defeated them both, shattering the last major tribal confederations that stood in his way. After his defeat, the once mighty Togrul Khan of the Kerates fled, only to be unceremoniously killed by border guards who did not recognize him. His death symbolized the end of an era, the collapse of the old steppe powers that had dominated the landscape for centuries. Jamaka's own men, hoping for a reward, betrayed him and brought him to Temujin in chains. But Temujin, disgusted by their disloyalty to their own leader, had them executed immediately. He then offered to renew his friendship with Jamaka, but Jamaka refused, stating there could be only one sun in the sky. Respecting his old friend's wish, Temujin granted him a noble death, one without the shedding of blood, as was reserved for royalty. According to the secret history of the Mongols, he had Jamukha's back broken. It was a brutal end to a complex relationship that defined much of Temujin's rise to power. He understood the power of generosity in building his new order. After every victory, he would distribute the captured goods, livestock, weapons, and treasures among all his warriors, not just the commanders. This ensured the loyalty of the common soldier, who knew that following Temujin meant a share in the spoils of victory. As he absorbed more tribes, he also absorbed their knowledge and skills. He integrated skilled artisans, administrators, and engineers from conquered peoples into his rapidly expanding nation. He was not just conquering people. He was harvesting talent and building a more sophisticated and capable society. By incorporating so many different clans and peoples, he was actively forging a new, unified identity. People were encouraged to see themselves not as Teocheid or Kerate or Tatar, but as Karmag Mongol, all Mongols. It was a nation built not on shared ancestry, but on a shared allegiance to him and his new order. In the spring of 1206, having defeated all his rivals and united the warring tribes of the Mongolian plateau, Temujin summoned a great assembly, a Kurultai, on the banks of the Onon River. It was to be the most important gathering in the history of the steppes. Chieftains from every corner of his new nation came to attend. They represented a population that had known nothing but division and warfare for centuries. Now, for the first time, they were gathered as one people, under one leader, to witness the birth of an empire. At the heart of the Kurultai, a towering white banner with 9 horsetails was raised. This tug, or spirit banner, symbolized the unity of the Mongol tribes and the presence of the eternal sky god, Tengri. Its raising marked the official beginning of the new Mongol nation. In a solemn ceremony, the assembled chieftains proclaimed Temujin as the supreme ruler of all the peoples of the felt-walled tents. They bestowed upon him a new title, one that would echo through history. Genghis Khan, meaning oceanic or universal ruler. The title was more than just a name, it was a divine mandate. It signified that he was not merely a tribal Khan, but the chosen instrument of Tengri, the sky god, with a divine mission to rule the entire world. This belief would justify the unprecedented conquests that were to follow. Genghis Khan immediately began to organize his new nation. He understood that unity could not be maintained by charisma alone. It required structure, law, and a shared sense of purpose. The days of tribal chaos were over. The era of the Mongol Empire had begun. The Kurultai was also a massive celebration. For days, the united tribes feasted, held wrestling competitions, and raced their prized horses. It was a shared moment of relief and joy, a celebration of the peace that had finally been achieved on the Mongolian plateau after generations of strife. This gathering was a strategic masterstroke. By having all the chieftains publicly acclaim him, Genghis Khan secured their buy-in. They were no longer just conquered subjects. They were now founding members of the empire, with a stake in its success and a sworn duty to its leader. He used the occasion to lay out his vision for the future. He spoke of a world united under Mongol rule, a world of law, order, and secure trade. He transformed the Mongols' predatory raiding instinct into a grand imperial ambition, giving them a purpose far beyond simple plunder. The proclamation of Genghis Khan marked a fundamental shift in the Mongols' relationship with the outside world. They were no longer a remote collection of nomadic tribes. They were now a unified, organized, and ambitious empire, poised on the borders of the great sedentary civilizations of China, Persia, and Europe. This event was the culmination of 4 decades of struggle. From an abandoned child fighting for scraps to a uniter of a nation, Temujin's journey was complete. But for Genghis Khan, the great Khan, the work of fulfilling his divine destiny had only just begun. To govern his new empire and prevent a return to tribal chaos, Genghis Khan codified Mongol customs and his own edicts into a single, secret legal code known as the Yassa. It was the constitution of the empire, a set of divine commandments that all, including the Khan himself, were expected to obey. The Yassa was never made public to conquered peoples, and its exact text is lost, but its principles are known. It established absolute laws on property, conduct, and military discipline. For example, the theft of a horse or a cow became a capital offense, bringing order to the previously lawless steppe. One of the Yassa's most critical laws was the absolute prohibition of kidnapping or enslaving any Mongol. This single law struck at the heart of the intertribal warfare that had defined their existence, ensuring that the Mongols would never again prey upon each other as they had for centuries. The law demanded absolute loyalty to the Khan. Desertion from battle or failure to aid a comrade in distress was punishable by death. This fostered an incredible sense of cohesion and mutual dependence within the Mongol army, making their units almost impossible to break. Adultery was strictly forbidden and punishable by death, a law designed to prevent the blood feuds and social chaos that often arose from such disputes. The Yassa sought to regulate every aspect of life that could lead to conflict, imposing a strict moral and social order on the population. To promote unity, the Yassa made it illegal to use the old tribal names like Kerate or Naaman. From this point forward, all were to be known simply as Mongols. This was a direct attempt to erase old identities and forge a new, single, imperial one. The Yassa also contained pragmatic rules for daily life and military campaigns. It dictated environmental protections, forbidding urination or washing clothes in rivers and streams, which was crucial for maintaining clean water sources for a massive, moving army. It established complete religious freedom. Priests, monks, and other holy men of all faiths, be they Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, or Taoist, were exempted from taxes and public service. Genghis Khan understood that persecuting other religions was a pointless way to create enemies. The laws were enforced without exception. Nobility offered no protection. The son of a Khan was subject to the same punishment as a common herdsman. This radical equality before the law was a cornerstone of Genghis Khan's state and a key reason for its internal stability. By making law supreme, Genghis Khan shifted the ultimate authority from himself to the Yassa. He was the guardian of the law, not above it. This provided a framework for governance that could, in theory, outlast him and ensure the continuity of the empire. While its specific articles are debated by historians, the effect of the Yassa is undisputed. It was the legal bedrock that transformed a loose confederation of warring tribes into a disciplined and orderly nation, capable of acting with a singular, terrifying purpose. Genghis Khan's military genius was not just in tactics, but in organization. He completely restructured his army, breaking the old tribal command structures. The foundation of his new military was the Tumen, a self-contained decimal unit of 10,000 warriors. Each Tumen was subdivided into smaller decimal units. There were regiments of 1,000 called Mingan, squadrons of 100 called Jagun, and squads of 10 called Arban. This structure was simple, logical, and incredibly efficient for command and control. The smallest and most important unit was the Arban, the squad of 10. The men in each squad were responsible for each other. If one man deserted or failed in his duty, all 9 of his comrades were executed along with him. This created an unbreakable bond and absolute reliability in the chaos of battle. Command at all levels was based on meritocracy. The leaders of the Tumens, the Noyans, were not hereditary nobles, but were Genghis Khan's most proven and loyal generals, men like Subutai, Jebe, and Mukhali. They were chosen for their ability, not their bloodline. This decimal system allowed for incredible tactical flexibility. A commander could detach a squadron of 100 or a regiment of 1,000 for a flanking maneuver with a single, simple command, knowing the unit would operate with discipline and cohesion. The army could be divided and reformed with fluid precision. The army was a self-sufficient moving city. Each tumen was accompanied by its families, herds, and logistical support, allowing it to operate independently for extended periods, far from any supply base. The entire Mongol nation was, in effect, a nation in arms. This organization completely erased the old tribal structures that had been the source of so much internal conflict. A man's loyalty was no longer to his clan chief, but to his squad leader, his squadron leader, his regiment leader, and ultimately to Genghis Khan himself. Every adult male under the age of 60 who was capable of bearing arms was obligated to serve in the army. This gave Genghis Khan a massive reservoir of manpower to draw upon, allowing him to field armies that were often larger than those of the sedentary empires he attacked. The tumens were not just fighting units, they were the administrative blocks of the new empire. The commander of a tumen was also the governor of the territory his unit occupied, responsible for collecting taxes and maintaining order. The military and civil administration were one and the same. This revolutionary system transformed the chaotic energy of the steppe nomads into a disciplined, organized, and terrifyingly effective military machine. It was this structure that enabled the Mongols to coordinate vast armies across continents and conquer with such devastating speed. The heart of the Mongol army was its cavalry. Every warrior was a master horseman, having ridden since childhood. This gave them a degree of mobility that no infantry-based army could ever hope to match. They could cover vast distances at incredible speed, appearing where they were least expected. Their primary weapon was the compact, powerful composite bow. A Mongol warrior could fire a storm of arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at a full gallop. They carried several types of arrows, from armor-piercing heads to whistling arrows used for signaling. A classic Mongol tactic was the feigned retreat. The light cavalry would charge, engage the enemy briefly, and then pretend to panic and flee. When the disciplined ranks of the enemy broke formation to give chase, they would be led into a prepared trap. The trap was sprung by the hidden main force, particularly the heavily armored Mongol lancers. While the enemy was disorganized and spread out, the heavy cavalry would smash into their exposed flanks, causing a total collapse. It was a simple, terrifyingly effective, and endlessly repeated tactic. Encirclement, or the chulugma tactic, was another signature strategy. The Mongols would use their superior mobility to flow around the enemy army, enveloping it from all sides. Once surrounded, the enemy was subjected to a relentless barrage of arrows from every direction. They were masters of maneuver and surprise. Mongol armies would often divide into multiple columns, advancing along separate routes and converging on the target from different directions simultaneously, overwhelming the defender's ability to respond. Before a major battle, they would use scouts and spies to gain a complete understanding of the terrain. They would identify the best locations for ambushes, the location of water sources, and the weakest points in the enemy's deployment. They rarely fought on unfavorable ground. The Mongol warriors traveled light, with each man bringing a string of several horses. By switching to fresh mounts regularly, they could maintain a relentless pace of advance for days on end, far outstripping the movement speed of any contemporary army. They did not always seek a decisive, pitched battle. Often, they would employ hit-and-run tactics for days or weeks, harassing the enemy, cutting off their supply lines, and wearing down their morale before committing to a final, crushing blow. Their battlefield communication was superb. A complex system of whistling arrows, black and white flags, and horns allowed commanders to transmit complex orders across a vast and chaotic battlefield, coordinating the movements of tens of thousands of men with precision. These tactics, honed on the steppes and executed with iron discipline, made the Mongol army the most effective fighting force of its age. They combined speed, deception, and overwhelming force in a way that their more static and predictable opponents simply could not comprehend or counter. Genghis Khan understood that the most powerful weapon in his arsenal was not the bow or the lance, but fear. He deliberately cultivated a reputation for utter ruthlessness and terrifying cruelty. The stories of what happened to cities that resisted him were his primary psychological weapon. Before attacking a major city, the Mongols would offer terms. If the city surrendered immediately without a fight, its populace would usually be spared, though they would have to pay a heavy tribute. This offer of mercy was a crucial part of the strategy, providing a clear choice. If the offer was refused and the city chose to resist, the consequences were designed to be unforgettable. After the city was inevitably taken, the Mongols would often engage in systematic, wholesale slaughter, leaving few survivors to tell the tale. The Mongols used terror as a policy. They would sometimes send out a few survivors or even merchants to spread the news of a city's complete annihilation. This news would travel faster than the Mongol army, demoralizing the next city on their path and making it far more likely to surrender. They employed gruesome tactics to amplify this fear. Pyramids of skulls were erected outside the ruins of defiant cities like Nishapur and Herat. These macabre monuments served as a chilling warning to anyone who contemplated resistance. Human shields were a common tactic. During a siege, the Mongols would round up prisoners from the surrounding countryside or from a previously captured town and force them to advance ahead of the Mongol army, absorbing the first volleys of arrows from the city walls. This psychological warfare was incredibly effective. The sheer terror inspired by the Mongols often caused cities to capitulate without a fight. Armies would break and flee before even engaging them in battle, their morale shattered by the reputation that preceded them. They also used disinformation and propaganda. Their spies would spread rumors within a target city, exaggerating the size of the Mongol army, speaking of their supernatural powers, and fostering discord and paranoia among the leadership and the populace. The objective was not mindless slaughter, but calculated submission. Every act of terror had a strategic purpose: to make resistance seem futile. It was cheaper in terms of Mongol lives and resources to conquer a city through fear than through a protracted and bloody siege. This strategy created a surrender cascade. Once a few major cities in a region were annihilated for their defiance, the surrounding towns and fortresses would often rush to submit, hoping to avoid the same fate. The empire expanded through a wave of fear. The legacy of this terror was so profound that for centuries after the Mongols were gone, their name was synonymous with death and destruction. Genghis Khan had weaponized fame itself, making his army's reputation as deadly as its arrows. An army that moves as fast as the Mongols requires a communication and supply system to match. Genghis Khan's solution was the yam, a revolutionary postal and relay system that became the central nervous system of his vast empire. The yam consisted of a network of thousands of well-stocked relay stations, established roughly every 25 to 30 miles along the empire's major routes. Each station was manned and kept a herd of fresh, rested horses ready at a moment's notice. A messenger carrying an imperial decree or vital intelligence would ride at top speed from one station to the next. Upon arrival, he would simply grab a fresh horse or even pass his message pouch to a waiting rested rider, and the message would continue its journey without delay. This system allowed messages to travel up to 200 miles in a single day, an unheard-of speed in the 13th century. It meant Genghis Khan could receive intelligence from the farthest reaches of his empire and dispatch orders with unprecedented swiftness. The Yam riders carried a metal medallion called a pazer, which gave them absolute authority. Anyone, from a peasant to a local governor, was required by law to provide them with food, lodging, a fresh horse, or any assistance needed. Failure to do so was punishable by death. The system wasn't just for official messages. It was also used for transporting key personnel, military officers, and foreign envoys across the empire quickly and safely. It effectively shrank the vast distances of the Mongol domain. The Yam was also a massive intelligence-gathering network. The station masters were the eyes and ears of the Khan, required to report on local conditions, the movement of troops, and any signs of discontent. It was a logistical marvel and an instrument of control. Maintaining this vast network was a huge national undertaking, requiring immense resources in horses, manpower, and food stores. The immense cost was justified by the incredible strategic advantage it provided, allowing the Mongols to command and control their empire with unmatched efficiency. The Yam system was the key to Mongol logistics. While the army mostly lived off the land, the Yam could be used to rush critical supplies, such as arrows or specialized siege equipment, to the front lines where they were most needed. This incredible communication network allowed Mongol commanders to coordinate armies operating hundreds or even thousands of miles apart. A general in Russia could coordinate his attack with another general in Persia, based on orders that were only a few weeks old. The speed and efficiency of the Yam system constantly bewildered the Mongols' enemies. They couldn't understand how Mongol armies seemed to have perfect, up-to-the-minute intelligence about their own movements, while they themselves remained completely in the dark. Accustomed to fighting on the open steppe, the Mongols initially had little experience with siege warfare. The great walled cities of China and Persia presented a new and formidable challenge. At first, they would simply bypass heavily fortified cities, but this was not a sustainable strategy for conquest. Genghis Khan's strategic genius was his adaptability. He understood that to conquer sedentary empires, he had to master their form of warfare. He began to systematically collect and utilize the engineering talent of the people he conquered. Captured Chinese engineers were forced to teach the Mongols how to build and deploy a fearsome array of siege engines. An entire engineering corps was created within the Mongol army, responsible for constructing massive catapults, battering rams, and siege towers on site. They became masters of the trebuchet, a giant counterweight catapult capable of hurling enormous stones, flaming projectiles, and even diseased animal carcasses over city walls to smash fortifications and spread disease and terror within the besieged city. Another favorite tactic was diverting rivers. Mongol engineers would undertake massive earth-moving projects to dam or reroute a river, either to flood a city into submission or, more commonly, to cut off its water supply, forcing a surrender without a costly assault. They learned to use gunpowder technology from the Chinese, creating bombs, rockets, and smoke pots. These were not yet powerful enough to destroy walls, but they were incredibly effective at creating chaos, confusion, and terror among the defenders on the battlements. The Mongol army would screen its siege preparations with a constant barrage of arrows from thousands of archers. This massive covering fire would suppress the defenders on the walls, preventing them from interfering with the construction of siege towers and the advance of battering rams. The Mongols' logistical corps could transport these siege specialists and key components of their machines across vast distances. Engineers became as valuable a part of the Mongol war machine as elite cavalrymen. They developed a systematic approach to sieges. First, they would encircle the city to cut it off completely. Then, they would use prisoners to build the siege works and assault fortifications, preserving Mongol lives. Finally came the relentless, round-the-clock bombardment. This rapid adoption and mastery of siege technology was a game-changer. It meant that no city, no matter how strong its walls, was safe. The Mongols had overcome their one major military weakness, combining steppe mobility with the power to crush any fortress. The once impenetrable walls of cities like Samarkand, Beijing, and Baghdad were no match for the Mongols' relentless and innovative siegecraft. The combination of terror, engineering, and overwhelming force proved to be an unstoppable formula for conquest. By 1218, the Mongol Empire shared a border with the powerful Khwarezmian Empire, a vast Turkic-Persian sultanate that dominated Central Asia. Initially, Genghis Khan had no intention of war. He sought a trade agreement, seeing the immense potential for commerce. Genghis Khan sent a massive trade caravan of 450 merchants to the Khwarezmian frontier city of Otrar. It was a mission of peace and commerce, a clear signal that the Mongols desired a profitable relationship, not a hostile one. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, was suspicious and greedy. Claiming the merchants were spies, which some may have been, he ordered the entire caravan seized and all of its members executed. He then confiscated their vast wealth for himself. Genghis Khan, a ruler who considered ambassadors and merchants to be under his sacred protection, was patient. He sent a second diplomatic mission, composed of 2 Mongols and a Muslim, to demand that the governor be handed over for punishment and the stolen goods returned. In an act of supreme arrogance and folly, Shah Muhammad II not only refused the demand, but had the Mongol envoys' heads shaved in humiliation and executed their Muslim guide. He then sent the 2 headless bodies back to Genghis Khan. This was an unforgivable insult. To kill an ambassador was a declaration of war in any culture, but to the Mongols, who held diplomatic immunity as sacred under the Yassa, it was a crime against the cosmic order. Genghis Khan's desire for trade turned into a burning need for vengeance. Genghis Khan is said to have climbed a mountain, bared his head, and prayed to the eternal sky god, Tengri, for 3 days. He proclaimed that he was not the author of this conflict and asked for the strength to exact a righteous punishment. This incident was the spark that ignited the largest and most destructive of all the Mongol campaigns. Genghis Khan mobilized his entire war machine, gathering an army of over 100,000 of his best warriors for a full-scale invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. The Shah of Khwarezmia fatally underestimated his opponent. Confident in his massive army and fortified cities, he decided to disperse his troops among various strongholds rather than meeting the Mongols in a decisive battle. This proved to be a catastrophic strategic error. The invasion was not just a punitive expedition, it was a meticulously planned conquest. Genghis Khan gathered intelligence for years, mapping out the Khwarezmian lands, identifying political divisions, and learning the locations of oases in the deserts. He was coming not just to punish, but to conquer and absorb. The Khwarezmian spark ignited a fire that would consume Central Asia, Persia, and parts of the Middle East. The Shah's arrogance had unleashed a force of destruction upon his own people that would change the course of history in the Islamic world forever. Even before his great war with Khwarezmia, Genghis Khan honed his strategies against a formidable opponent closer to home, the Tangut Kingdom of Western Xia. This prosperous state, located along the Silk Road, was the Mongols' first major conquest of a sedentary civilization. The campaigns against the Western Xia, starting around 1209, served as a crucial training ground. Here, the Mongols learned how to fight in unfamiliar terrain like deserts and mountains, and how to attack fortified cities, a new challenge for the steppe warriors. In one early siege, the Mongols attempted to flood the capital of Western Xia by diverting a nearby river. However, their engineering was still rudimentary. The dike they built broke, and the resulting flood washed away their own camp instead of the city. It was a failure, but a valuable lesson learned. Despite setbacks, the Mongols' persistence was relentless. They would raid the countryside year after year, destroying crops, seizing livestock, and gradually strangling the Xia economy. They were waging a war of attrition, weakening the kingdom from the outside in. The Tangut army was formidable, boasting heavy cavalry and a large infantry force, but they could not cope with the mobility and unorthodox tactics of the Mongols. In open battle, the Mongols consistently outmaneuvered and defeated the larger Xia forces. After years of devastating raids and military defeats, the Emperor of Western Xia finally submitted in 1210. He agreed to become a vassal of the Mongols, paying a massive tribute of camels, textiles, and falcons, and providing military support for their future campaigns. The conquest of Western Xia was strategically vital. It secured Genghis Khan's southern flank, preventing a potential alliance between the Xia and his next major target, the Jin dynasty of China. It also gave him control over a crucial segment of the Silk Road. Crucially, the campaign provided the Mongols with a large number of captured artisans and engineers. These were the very individuals who would bring the knowledge of siege warfare that the Mongols desperately needed to challenge the much greater cities of the Jin and Khwarezmian empires. The Western Xia campaign also revealed a key element of Mongol grand strategy. They didn't always need to occupy a territory completely. A vassal state, providing tribute, troops, and secure borders, was often more valuable and less costly than direct rule. The Tanguts, however, would prove to be unreliable vassals. Their repeated refusal to provide troops for the Western campaigns would eventually lead Genghis Khan to return at the end of his life to extinguish their kingdom once and for all. The successful subjugation of Western Xia was the first major step in the Mongols' transformation from a steppe confederation into a true empire. It was a dress rehearsal for the even greater conquests that lay ahead, and a clear signal to the world of the Khan's unstoppable ambition. With Western Xia subdued, Genghis Khan turned his attention to a far greater prize, the powerful Jurchen-led Jin dynasty, which controlled all of northern China. The Jin were old enemies who had long demanded tribute from the Mongol tribes. Now the roles were about to be reversed. The Jin dynasty possessed a massive army, numbered in the hundreds of thousands, composed of elite cavalry and vast legions of infantry. They were also protected by one of the wonders of the world, the Great Wall of China. To the Jin, the Mongols were nothing more than contemptible barbarians. In 1211, Genghis Khan launched his invasion. He did not attack the Great Wall directly. Instead, using his superior mobility and local guides, his army bypassed the main fortifications and slipped through a less defended pass, rendering the Great Wall useless. Once inside Jin territory, the Mongol army was like a force of nature. They avoided the major cities at first, instead focusing on devastating the countryside, the source of the Jin's wealth and food. They were a shark circling a whale, taking bites and bleeding their opponent dry. The Mongols crushed several large Jin armies in open battle. The Jin generals, accustomed to more static warfare, were consistently outwitted by the Mongols' feigned retreats, flanking maneuvers, and superior command and control. The Jin military machine, for all its size, was slow and predictable. One of Genghis Khan's most brilliant victories came at the Battle of Yehuling, the Badger Mouth Pass. He sent one of his best generals, Mukhali, on a daring suicidal charge against the center of the Jin line, while the main Mongol force secretly climbed the mountains to ambush the Jin from the rear. The Battle of Yehuling was a complete catastrophe for the Jin. Their main field army was annihilated, and the bones of the dead were said to have whitened the pass for years. The road to the Jin capital of Zhongdu now lay open. The siege of Zhongdu in 1215 was one of the longest and most brutal of the era. The city's defenses were immense, but the Mongols, using their now perfected siege techniques, and a sea of captive laborers settled in for a relentless, grinding assault. Inside the city, starvation and disease were rampant. Reports spoke of cannibalism as the food supplies ran out. The Jin emperor eventually fled south, leaving the city to its fate. When Zhongdu finally fell, it was plundered for a month, its palaces burned to the ground. The conquest of Jin China was not completed in Genghis Khan's lifetime. It would take another 2 decades. But his initial campaigns shattered the dynasty's power, broke its military, and secured northern China as a permanent part of the growing Mongol Empire. The war against the Jin transformed the Mongol army. They absorbed vast quantities of Chinese technology, wealth, and administrative expertise. They were no longer just a steppe horde. They were becoming the masters of a sophisticated, sedentary empire. Genghis Khan understood that an army that does not train is an army that will be defeated. To maintain his warriors' legendary skills in horsemanship and archery, especially during times of peace, he instituted the nökers, the Great Hunt. The nökers was not merely a hunt for food, it was a massive military exercise disguised as a hunt. It involved tens of thousands of warriors, often an entire tumen, and would last for months during the winter. It was the Mongol equivalent of modern large-scale military wargames. First, a huge circle, sometimes hundreds of miles in circumference, was formed by a line of soldiers. The soldiers then began to slowly advance inwards over a period of weeks, driving every animal within the circle, wolves, deer, gazelles, boars, before them. It was strictly forbidden for any animal to escape the closing ring. This required incredible coordination and discipline from every single soldier. A momentary lapse in attention by one man could create a gap for which his entire unit might be punished. As the circle tightened over many weeks, the concentration of panicked animals became immense. The final stage was a battue, where the animals were trapped in a smaller, cleared area, ready for the hunt itself to begin. The honor of the first kill went to the Khan himself. He would ride into the enclosure and select his targets, showcasing his own skill with the bow. After him came the princes and generals, followed finally by all the warriors. The hunt was a brutal, chaotic spectacle, but it served as invaluable training. Warriors practiced shooting at moving targets from horseback, they honed their ability to maneuver in close quarters, and they reinforced the iron discipline of their units. The nökers was also a lesson in logistics and planning. It required the movement and supply of a huge force for an extended period, testing the army's ability to sustain itself in the field, even in the harshest winter conditions. After the hunt, a great feast would be held, and the vast quantities of meat would be preserved and stored, providing food for the army for the coming months. It was a practical way of stocking the military larder. At the conclusion of the hunt, some of the exhausted animals would be intentionally allowed to escape by the Khan, a symbolic act of mercy and a reminder of his power over life and death. Through the Great Hunt, Genghis Khan ensured his army never grew soft. It kept their martial skills sharp, reinforced their discipline, and practiced the very tactics of encirclement and annihilation that they used so effectively in war. Genghis Khan was a master of what we now call intelligence warfare. He understood that knowledge of the enemy's strengths, weaknesses, and intentions was just as important as the strength of his own army. He never went into a conflict blind. The Mongols established a sophisticated network of spies long before any invasion. These agents were often merchants who could travel freely in foreign lands, observing fortifications, mapping roads, identifying sources of water, and assessing the political climate. They were also adept at turning locals. They would recruit disaffected officials, minorities, or rival political factions within an enemy kingdom, promising them power or wealth in exchange for information and assistance when the invasion began. Deception was a key part of their strategy. Mongol spies would spread black propaganda and disinformation, aiming to sow discord among the enemy's leadership, create panic among the population, and lure enemy armies into traps. The Mongols would often manipulate their enemies into making foolish decisions. During the Khwarezmian campaign, they sent a small detachment on a long, arduous march through the Kizilkum Desert, appearing suddenly where the Shah thought no army could survive, causing panic and disrupting his entire defensive plan. Diplomacy was another tool of deception. Genghis Khan would often send envoys to one enemy while preparing to attack another, lulling his true target into a false sense of security. His gestures of peace were often the most dangerous prelude to war. Before a battle, scouts known as Jerugun would fan out, screening the army's advance and providing a constant stream of information about the enemy's movements and the surrounding terrain. The Mongol generals almost always had a clearer picture of the battlefield than their opponents. They also understood the importance of economic intelligence. Their merchant spies would report on a kingdom's wealth, its key industries, and its trade routes. This allowed the Mongols to target the economic heart of their enemies, crippling them before the final blow. The Yam postal system was the backbone of this intelligence network. It allowed reports from spies deep within enemy territory to reach the Khan's headquarters with incredible speed, enabling him to make decisions based on near real-time information. By combining thorough espionage with clever diplomatic maneuvering and psychological warfare, Genghis Khan ensured that he often won the war before the first arrow was even fired. He outthought his opponents, turning their own strengths and expectations against them. The war against the Khwarezmian Empire was total. While Genghis Khan himself led the main force against the great cities of Samarkand and Bokhara, he unleashed two of his finest generals, Subutai and Jeeb, on a separate, extraordinary mission. Their task was to hunt down the fugitive Shah Muhammad II, who had fled westward. But the mission evolved into something far greater, a 3-year, 5,000-mile reconnaissance in force that would terrify the known world. Subutai and Jeeb led their corps of 20,000 elite horsemen through Persia into the Caucasus Mountains, a region of fierce warrior kingdoms completely unknown to the Mongols. They adapted and conquered as they went. They smashed the powerful Christian kingdom of Georgia, annihilating their army of heavily armored knights. This victory sent shockwaves through the Crusader states and Europe, who were initially confused, believing this mysterious Eastern army might be the mythical Christian king, Prester John. After crossing the Caucasus, they emerged onto the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea, the home of the nomadic Cumans. They skillfully used diplomacy to divide the Cumans from their Rus allies before crushing the Cuman forces. This intrusion brought them into direct conflict with a coalition of Rus princes from Kiev, Galicia, and other principalities, who had answered the Cumans' call for help. The Rus gathered a massive army, estimated at 80,000 men, to confront the invaders. At the Kalka River in 1223, Subutai executed a masterpiece of strategy. He used the classic Mongol feigned retreat, luring the overconfident and disorganized Rus army on a grueling 9-day chase, stretching their forces out and exhausting them. When the trap was sprung, the result was one of the most one-sided victories in military history. The Mongols turned on their pursuers, and the main Mongol force attacked the strung-out column. The Rus-Cuman coalition was utterly annihilated. As a sign of respect for royalty, the captured Rus princes were not killed with blades. Instead, Subutai had them rolled in carpets and placed under a large wooden platform. The Mongol generals then held a victory feast on top of the platform, crushing the princes to death. Having shattered the armies of every kingdom they encountered, Subutai and Jeeb's expedition finally turned east, completing their great circular raid and rejoining Genghis Khan's main army. They had not just hunted a king. They had mapped the pathway for the future Mongol invasion of Europe. The Great Raid of Subutai and Jebe was a terrifying announcement to the West. It demonstrated the incredible reach, speed, and fighting prowess of the Mongol army. The borders of Europe were no longer safe. They had been scouted and found wanting. The Mongol conquests were not random acts of plunder. They were a systematic effort to gain control of the most valuable economic prize of the medieval world, the Silk Road. This ancient network of trade routes was the artery of commerce between East and West. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road was fragmented and dangerous. It passed through dozens of different kingdoms, each charging heavy taxes and tolls. Merchants constantly faced the threat of bandits and extortion from local warlords. Genghis Khan's conquests unified the entire length of the Silk Road, from the shores of the Black Sea to the heart of China, under a single political authority for the first time in history. This had a profound and immediate impact on world trade. Under the Mongols, the routes were made safe. The Yassa imposed the death penalty for banditry, and Mongol patrols actively secured the roads. A merchant could travel from one end of the empire to the other with a level of safety that was previously unimaginable. The Yam relay system was not just for military messages. It was also made available for the use of merchants, especially those carrying high-value goods. This greatly increased the speed and efficiency of long-distance trade. The Mongols rationalized the chaotic system of local taxes and tolls. While they collected their own taxes, they were standardized and predictable, which was far better for merchants than the arbitrary extortion they had faced before. With the route secure and orderly, the volume of trade exploded. Goods, ideas, technologies, and cultures began to flow between China, the Islamic world, and Europe on an unprecedented scale. Technologies like gunpowder, printing, the compass, and the blast furnace, which were developed in China, now traveled west along the Mongol-controlled routes, where they would eventually reshape European society and warfare. The economic benefits for the Mongol Empire were immense. The taxes and tribute from this flourishing trade provided a steady stream of revenue that funded the Mongol state and its massive armies, creating a self-sustaining cycle of conquest and commerce. This period of unprecedented connectivity and stability across Eurasia is now known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. It was a peace bought at a terrible price, but it created a truly globalized world for the first time. This new world order was famously described by the saying, "A maiden bearing a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely from one end of the empire to the other." While an exaggeration, it captured the essence of the security the Mongols brought to transcontinental travel. Conquering a vast empire was one thing, governing it was another. Genghis Khan was not just a destroyer, he was a nation builder who established a sophisticated, if ruthless, system for administering his conquests. The Mongols were a tiny minority in the vast lands they ruled. They had no experience in running cities or agricultural states. Genghis Khan's pragmatic solution was to co-opt the local elites and administrative structures wherever he conquered. He actively sought out and employed skilled administrators from conquered peoples. Uyghurs, Persians, Chinese, and others who had the skills to manage a complex state were given positions of great responsibility within the imperial government. The empire was divided into administrative districts, often based on the pre-existing political geography. A Mongol governor, or Daraghachi, was appointed to each district. His primary jobs were to ensure loyalty, maintain order, and most importantly, collect taxes. To ensure accurate taxation and military conscription, the Mongols conducted detailed censuses of the populations they conquered. This was a massive bureaucratic undertaking that provided the state with a precise understanding of its human and economic resources. The Yassa, the Great Law Code, provided a uniform legal framework for the entire empire. While local customs were often tolerated, The supreme law of the Khan applied everywhere, ensuring a level of consistency and predictability across vast distances. The administration was fundamentally military in nature. The Daraghachi were often military officers, and their authority was backed by a local Mongol garrison. The primary purpose of the civil administration was to support the Mongol military machine. Literacy and record-keeping were crucial. Genghis Khan adopted the Uyghur script as the official written language for Mongolian. This allowed for the creation of a literate bureaucracy capable of issuing decrees, recording laws, and maintaining census records. This system of governance was pragmatic and adaptable. The Mongols were not interested in imposing their own culture or way of life on their subjects. They were interested in loyalty, order, and tribute. As long as these were provided, they allowed a surprising degree of local autonomy. Genghis Khan's administrative model, blending Mongol military oversight with the expertise of local bureaucracies, created a stable framework for the Pax Mongolica. It was a system designed for the efficient extraction of wealth to fuel further conquest. While his reputation was built on terror, Genghis Khan's policy towards religion was one of remarkable tolerance, born not of enlightenment, but of pure pragmatism. He saw no strategic advantage in creating enemies by persecuting people for their faith. Genghis Khan himself followed the traditional Mongol shamanistic belief in a single, eternal sky god, Tengri. He believed Tengri had given him a divine mandate to rule the world, but he did not believe that this was the only path to the divine for others. The Yassa, his legal code, explicitly granted religious freedom to all. It decreed that all religions were to be respected and that no preference was to be shown to any one of them. This was a foundational law of the empire. To ensure the cooperation of religious institutions, Genghis Khan exempted all legitimate religious leaders, priests, monks, mullahs, rabbis, and sages, from taxation, corvée labor, and military service. This won him the goodwill of powerful religious establishments across his empire. He was genuinely curious about other faiths and enjoyed hosting debates between religious leaders. He famously summoned the Taoist master Qiu Chuji, also known as Changchun, to his camp in Afghanistan, hoping to learn the secret of immortality. This policy of tolerance was a key tool for pacifying conquered territories. By protecting local religions, the Mongols avoided the religious insurgencies that so often plagued other empires. It neutralized the clergy, a potential source of organized resistance. The Khan and his successors became patrons of various religions. They funded the building of temples, mosques, and churches. The Mongol court itself was a diverse tapestry of faiths, with Nestorian Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims serving as trusted advisors. This tolerance allowed for a remarkable cross-pollination of religious ideas across the Silk Road. Buddhist art began to show Persian influences, while Islamic scholars gained access to Chinese knowledge of medicine and astronomy. This pragmatic approach stood in stark contrast to the religious intolerance and holy wars that were common in both Europe and the Middle East at the time. For the Mongols, a man's faith was his own business, but his loyalty and his taxes belonged to the Khan. However, this tolerance had its limits. If a religious group was suspected of fomenting rebellion or challenging the Khan's authority, the response would be swift and brutal. The supreme religion of the empire was obedience to the law of the Yassa. By separating church and state, Genghis Khan created a stable multi-religious empire. He demonstrated that unity did not require uniformity, and that diverse peoples could be governed effectively as long as their spiritual lives were left untouched. A war machine as vast as the Mongol army required a constant and massive supply of resources to sustain it. The primary purpose of the Mongol state and the territories it conquered was to generate the revenue needed to fund its own expansion. The most direct form of revenue was plunder, the immediate aftermath of a successful conquest, especially of a city that resisted, involved systematic looting. Gold, silver, silks, weapons, and other valuables were collected and distributed. A portion of all plunder was reserved for the Khan and the imperial family, forming the basis of their immense wealth. The rest was distributed among the soldiers according to a set formula, ensuring that every warrior had a direct stake in victory. Once a region was pacified, plunder gave way to organized tribute and taxation. Conquered peoples were required to pay regular taxes, often calculated based on the detailed censuses the Mongols conducted. Taxes could be paid in various forms. Agricultural communities paid in grain or livestock, urban centers paid in currency or finished goods like textiles and metalwork. The system was adaptable to the local economy. The control of the Silk Road generated huge customs duties. Taxes on the vast flow of goods traveling across the empire were a major and consistent source of income for the Mongol treasury. In addition to taxes, conquered populations were subject to the Kalan, a corvée labor system. They could be conscripted to work on state projects like building roads, bridges, and siege works, or to serve as laborers for the Mongol army. The Daraghachi, or Mongol governors, were responsible for overseeing this entire system. Their performance was judged on their ability to deliver the required quota of taxes and tribute to the central government without provoking a rebellion. The wealth extracted from conquered lands was funneled directly back into the military. It paid for the production of arrows, the maintenance of bows, the breeding of war horses, and the immense logistical needs of the yam system. This created a powerful, self-perpetuating cycle. Conquest brought wealth, and wealth fueled further conquest. The Mongol Empire was an economic system designed for perpetual expansion. The burden of these taxes and levies fell heavily on the peasant and artisan classes of the conquered lands. While the Pax Mongolica brought trade and security, for the common person, it often meant a life of hard labor for the benefit of their foreign masters. Genghis Khan treated populations as a strategic resource to be managed, moved, and exploited for the benefit of the empire. He practiced a deliberate policy of population relocation on a massive scale. After a conquest, the Mongols would systematically identify and round up artisans and skilled craftsmen, engineers, weavers, metalworkers, doctors, and scribes. These individuals were considered valuable spoils of war. These captive artisans and their families would be forcibly relocated, often thousands of miles across the empire, to wherever their skills were needed most. Many were sent to the Mongol capital, Karakoram, to build and beautify the imperial center. This policy served several purposes. It drained conquered regions of their most talented people, making them less capable of recovery and rebellion. It also served as a powerful tool for technological and cultural transfer across the empire. Entire populations could be moved for strategic reasons. Sometimes, farming communities were relocated to uncultivated lands to increase food production for the army. Other times, nomadic groups were moved to border regions to act as a buffer against enemies. Another key strategy was the scattering of conquered tribes. To break their spirit and prevent them from uniting in rebellion, the men of a defeated tribe would be dispersed throughout the Mongol army, assigned to different decimal units far from their kin. Less useful populations, particularly the urban poor or peasants from a fiercely defiant region, were sometimes used as human shields in sieges or simply massacred to make an example and to clear land for other uses. The integration of conquered soldiers was crucial. Instead of just killing defeated armies, the Mongols would often incorporate the surviving soldiers into their own forces, bolstering their numbers for the next campaign. This constant mixing and moving of peoples accelerated the creation of a unique, cosmopolitan Mongol imperial culture. It broke down old ethnic and regional barriers, forcing people to interact and integrate under a new, overarching identity. For those who were forcibly relocated, life was one of exile and hardship. But this brutal policy was one of the key engines of the Pax Mongolica, creating a vast, interconnected, and surprisingly integrated world. While the term Mongol peace may seem like a contradiction, the unification of Eurasia under Genghis Khan's rule did usher in a period of unprecedented stability, communication, and cultural exchange that had a profound impact on world history. With the Silk Road secured and unified, the empire became a conduit for knowledge. Chinese innovations in medicine, such as pulse diagnosis and pharmacology, were transmitted to Persia and the Middle East, influencing the development of Islamic medicine. In return, Islamic knowledge of astronomy and mathematics flowed eastward to China. Persian astronomers, with their more sophisticated observational techniques, were invited to the Mongol court in China to help reform the calendar. The arts flourished through this cultural fusion. The design of Chinese ceramics, particularly the use of cobalt blue, was heavily influenced by Persian aesthetics. This gave rise to the iconic blue and white porcelain that would become famous worldwide. Cuisine was also transformed. Ingredients and cooking techniques spread across the empire. Noodles and dumplings traveled from China westward, while carrots and new spices were introduced from Persia and Central Asia into Chinese cooking. The Mongols' administrative system, particularly their use of paper money, which was adopted in Persia for a time, and the Yam postal system provided models of governance that were studied and marveled at by visitors like Marco Polo. This exchange was not limited to the elite. The forced relocation of artisans and the movement of armies and merchants meant that ordinary people were exposed to new ideas, languages, and customs on a massive scale, creating a more interconnected world. However, the Pax Mongolica had a dark side. This newfound connectivity also facilitated the rapid spread of disease. It is believed that the network of trade and communication established by the Mongols was the primary pathway by which the Black Death traveled from Asia to Europe. The Mongol Empire, especially under Genghis Khan's immediate successors, served as a bridge between civilizations. It broke down the barriers that had long separated the major cultures of the Old World, forcing them into direct and often fruitful contact. Genghis Khan's role was to create the conditions for this exchange. By shattering old empires and unifying their territories, he created a vast, secure space where ideas could travel as freely as merchants. He was the violent catalyst for an era of unprecedented globalism. As he entered his 60s, Genghis Khan, the master strategist, turned his mind to the one problem that had destroyed every previous steppe empire: succession. He knew that a dispute over leadership could unravel everything he had built. He had 4 sons by his principal wife, Bert, Jochai, Chagatai, Ojdai, and Tolui. Each was a powerful and ambitious warrior in his own right, but their personalities were vastly different, and a fierce rivalry existed among them. The biggest problem was the legitimacy of his eldest son, Jochai. He had been born shortly after Bert was rescued from her Merkit captors, and rumors persisted that he was not Genghis Khan's true son. This cloud of doubt was a source of constant conflict. In a heated family council, or Kurultai, Chagatai publicly denounced Jochai as a bastard of the Merkits, leading to a physical brawl between the brothers. Genghis Khan was forced to intervene, but the damage to family unity was done. Realizing that neither the controversial Jochai nor the harsh and inflexible Chagatai would be accepted by all, Genghis Khan made a pragmatic choice. He bypassed his 2 eldest sons and designated his 3rd son, the affable and generous Ojdai, as his successor to the title of Great Khan. Ojdai was not the most brilliant warrior or strategist, but he was charismatic, well-liked by his brothers and known for his generosity. Genghis Khan believed he was the one son who could hold the fragile coalition of the family together. To prevent the empire from fracturing immediately, Genghis Khan divided it into uluses, or khanates, for each of his 4 sons to rule. Jochai's heirs received the western steppes, Chagatai received Central Asia. Ojdai inherited the Mongol heartland and the supreme title, and the youngest, Tolui, served as regent until Ojdai's election. This system was designed to give each son his own domain and power base, while maintaining the theoretical unity of the empire under a single great Khan. It was a compromise between a centralized state and the nomadic tradition of sharing inheritance. The plan was sound in theory, but it laid the groundwork for the eventual breakup of the empire. The uluses would grow into functionally independent and often rival states, and the unity of the empire would prove impossible to maintain after a few generations. Jochai, the eldest son, died under mysterious circumstances shortly before his father in 1227. It is unknown if he died from illness or if he was assassinated on his father's orders for his increasingly independent behavior. His death removed one major obstacle to Ojdai's succession. By carefully planning the succession and forcing his sons and generals to swear an oath to uphold his decision, Genghis Khan did everything in his power to ensure a smooth transition. His final great campaign was against the forces of internal division. In 1226, an aging but still formidable Genghis Khan launched his final campaign. He turned his full wrath back upon the Tangut kingdom of Western Xia, whose emperor had betrayed him by refusing to provide troops for the Khwarezmian War. During this campaign, in the winter of 1227, Genghis Khan reportedly had a fall from his horse during a hunt, suffering serious internal injuries. Though weakened, he pressed on with the war, determined to see the Tanguts utterly destroyed. As his health failed, he continued to direct the final siege of the Tangut capital from his litter. His last commands were a chilling blueprint for genocide, the complete and total eradication of the Tangut people and their culture. The exact cause of his death in August 1227 is a mystery. Official histories cite his injuries from the fall or a subsequent fever. Other legends suggest he was assassinated by a captured Tangut princess or died from a wound received in his final battle. The truth was deliberately obscured. His death was kept a state secret. To prevent the news from demoralizing the army or alerting their enemies, anyone who encountered the funeral procession as it traveled back to the Mongol heartland was killed, ensuring the secret was kept. Once the Tangut capital fell and his final orders were carried out, his death was finally announced to the Mongol nation. The world's greatest conqueror, the man who had united the steppes and shattered empires, was gone. Genghis Khan's final wish was that the location of his grave be kept a secret forever. He wanted no grand tomb or mausoleum that could be desecrated by his enemies or become a site of pilgrimage. He wished to return to the steppe from which he came. According to legend, the funeral escort killed every person and animal they met on their journey to the gravesite to ensure secrecy. After the burial, the 1,000 horsemen who had trampled the ground to erase all traces of the grave were themselves executed by another group of soldiers. The final executioners, who knew the general location, were then also killed, leaving no one alive who knew the exact spot. It was the ultimate security measure to protect the Khan's final resting place from discovery. Legends also tell of a river being diverted over the grave to hide it forever, a technique used for the burial of other great ancient kings. The true story is likely lost to history, obscured by layers of myth. The location is believed to be somewhere on or near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun in the Kentai province of Mongolia. This mountain was a place of spiritual refuge for Genghis Khan during his youth, and it remains a highly protected and revered site. To this day, the tomb of Genghis Khan has never been found. Numerous expeditions, both amateur and scientific, have searched for it, using satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and historical accounts, but all have failed. Many Mongolians today believe the tomb should remain undisturbed. They feel that interfering with the Khan's final wish would be a sign of disrespect and could unleash a curse. The mystery is a part of his enduring legacy and a point of national pride. The secret of his burial is perhaps the final, successful strategy of Genghis Khan. By erasing his own physical presence from the world, he ensured that his legacy would not be tied to a single monument, but would instead live on in the history of the world he reshaped. Genghis Khan's impact on world history is almost impossible to overstate. In the span of just 2 decades, he unified a fractured people and built the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. His conquests, while brutal, shattered the old order of things. He destroyed decadent dynasties, swept away corrupt aristocracies, and broke down the walls that had separated civilizations for centuries, setting the stage for the modern world. By creating the Pax Mongolica, he established the first great era of globalism. The secure trade routes he forged became the highways for an unprecedented exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas between East and West. He left a complex and often contradictory legacy. To many in Russia, Persia, and the Middle East, he is remembered as a ruthless butcher, a destroyer of civilizations. His name is a byword for barbarism and destruction. But in modern Mongolia, he is revered as the nation's founding father. He is a symbol of strength, unity, and Mongolian identity, credited with creating a nation, a legal code, and a writing system where there was once only chaos. His genetic legacy is also staggering. Modern genetic studies suggest that a significant percentage of men in a vast region of Asia are his direct patrilineal descendants, making him arguably the most successful procreator in human history. He forever changed the geopolitical map of the world. The Mongol conquests directly led to the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the unification of Russia under Moscow, and the exposure of Europe to the technologies that would fuel its own renaissance and age of discovery. The strategies he pioneered, meritocracy, psychological warfare, combined arms tactics, and an emphasis on speed and intelligence, continue to be studied by military and business leaders to this day. His methods, if not his morals, remain relevant. Ultimately, Genghis Khan was a catalyst. He was an agent of creative destruction who violently and irrevocably forced the world onto a new path, for good and for ill. History, as we know, it is unimaginable without him. Though centuries have passed, the core principles of Mongol strategy remain surprisingly relevant in the modern world, from the battlefield to the boardroom. The idea of meritocracy, promoting people based on talent and loyalty, not connections, is a cornerstone of any successful modern organization. The Mongol emphasis on speed, decisive action, and adaptability is the very essence of modern disruptive innovation. Just as the Mongols bypassed the Great Wall, successful startups today bypass established industry barriers by being faster, more flexible, and by changing the rules of the game. Modern psychological operations, or psyops, are a direct descendant of the Mongols' use of reputation and terror. The strategic use of information and propaganda to demoralize an opponent and shape the narrative is a tactic Genghis Khan would have instantly understood. The importance of logistics and communication, exemplified by the YAM system, is more critical than ever. In business and warfare, the side with the superior ability to gather intelligence and move resources quickly almost always has the winning edge. The Mongol strategy of assimilation, absorbing the best technologies and talent from rivals, is a key practice in corporate acquisitions and globalized research and development. Successful entities learn from, and integrate the strengths of their competitors. Genghis Khan's focus on a clear, unifying vision, a divine mandate to rule the world, is analogous to the powerful mission statements that drive successful companies. A shared, ambitious goal is essential for motivating a large and diverse group of people. The concept of the Great Hunt, as a form of immersive, large-scale training, can be seen in modern corporate offsites, team-building exercises, and complex simulations, all designed to build cohesion and test skills in a controlled environment. The Mongol understanding of decentralized command within a centralized strategy, giving field commanders the autonomy to act, as long as it served the overall mission, is a model for effective modern management that empowers employees and fosters initiative. The strategy of collecting and analyzing data through spies and censuses is the 13th century version of today's big data, making decisions based on hard evidence and thorough intelligence, rather than just instinct, is a timeless principle of success. Genghis Khan's greatest lesson, perhaps, is that of adaptability. He was not bound by tradition. When steppe tactics failed against walled cities, he learned siegecraft. When he needed administrators, he used foreigners. He was willing to change everything except his ultimate goal. The story of Genghis Khan is more than just a history of a brutal conqueror. It is a masterclass in strategy, leadership, and the relentless will to power that demonstrates how a clear vision, combined with radical pragmatism and revolutionary organization, can, for a time, conquer the world.